recognition, because everyone in that chamber knew what that meant. Not genocide, something worse. Languages erased before they could be recorded, lineages rewritten, archives corrupted so completely that even survivors could not prove who they had been. Within a generation, there would be no evidence the Ilyari had ever existed at all. No crime, no history, no memory, just absence. They've already taken 17 worlds, she continued. Not destroyed. Cleared. Every structure intact. Every record gone. Someone behind the council line whispered a word they shouldn't have. There. The name moved through the chamber like contamination. The Dominion did not conquer. It corrected, and no one had ever successfully reversed one of their corrections. The counselor swallowed. Then you understand what invoking this clause means. For the first time, the Ilyari leader hesitated. Not because she didn't know, but because she did. Her gaze moved, not to the council, not to the observers, but to the core itself. An interface older than modern law. A system that did not negotiate. A signal that could not be recalled. This chamber exists for a reason, she said quietly. Because once something like this happened before, no one responded. Because there were no records of it. Only the chamber. Only the clause. And the absence where history should have been. Her hand rose. The entire chamber seemed to contract with it. You will not control what comes, the counselor said. You will not direct it. You will not stop it once it begins. I know. Her fingers hovered over the activation field. If they answer, the outcome will not belong to you. A breath, not fear, acceptance. It already doesn't. She pressed the interface. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then every system in the chamber went silent. Not offline, silent, as if something, somewhere, had acknowledged a signal. A single line appeared across the ancient display. No language header. No diplomatic code. Just a designation. Request received. Terran Custodian Authority. And beneath it, assessing. The lights dimmed. The air felt colder. And for the first time since the Ilyari entered the chamber, someone in the observation line stepped back. Because the question was no longer whether they would be saved. It was what exactly they had just invited into the galaxy. The response did not come with a fleet. That was the first thing that unsettled everyone. No hyperspace rupture. No incoming armada. No surge of encrypted military traffic flooding the system. For something that had just acknowledged a Clause Zero invocation. A protocol. So severe most civilizations refused to even study it. The absence of visible force felt wrong. It took 12 minutes for the second anomaly to appear. Every secure system on the archive world, civilian, military, diplomatic, registered a simultaneous handshake request. Origin, unknown. Encryption, non-standard. Clearance override, absolute. The request was not accepted. It didn't need to be. The system's open anyway. Not breached, not broken, reconfigured. By the time technicians realized what was happening, the network architecture of the entire station had already been mapped, mirrored, and reorganized into something no one present fully understood. Firewalls remained intact, but they no longer answered to their original commands. A message followed, not broadcast, delivered. Every individual in the chamber, counselors, observers, the Ilyari delegation, received it directly through their personal interface, in their native language, with flawless contextual accuracy. Access granted. Begin transfer. No signature. No introduction. No acknowledgement of authority. The emergency chamber was never meant to open. It had been sealed beneath the archive world for over 1,000 cycles, buried under layers of law, silence, and collective denial. Entire generations had been taught it was ceremonial, a relic, a symbolic gesture from a more violent age. No one believed it still worked. No one wanted it to. And yet tonight, the seals broke. Not gradually, not ceremonially. The locks disengaged all at once with a deep, resonant tone that rippled to the subterranean vault like a warning sent backward through history. Ancient mechanisms, older than most star nations, woke from dormancy. Dust lifted. Lights that had not been powered in centuries flickered on with cold precision. Every system in the archive world registered the same anomaly at the same time. Unauthorized activation, a clause 0. Within minutes, the chamber was surrounded. Observers, diplomats, enforcement units. Species from a dozen systems gathered at the threshold, but none of them stepped inside. Protocol didn't forbid entry. Fear did. At the center of the chamber stood a small delegation. Thin, luminous beings whose skin carried faint patterns like fractured glass catching light. The Ilyari, or what was left of them. They had arrived without announcement. No fleet, no escorts, no political backing. Just 5 survivors carrying everything their species had left, encoded in living memory. Their leader stood closest to the core console, her posture rigid, not from pride, but from the effort of holding herself together. Her kind did not tremble easily. They did not fracture under pressure. But what followed them across the stars had already broken something deeper than fear. Behind her, the archive cradle pulsed faintly. Billions of fragmented identities compressed into unstable biological storage. Entire lifetimes reduced to flickering data. Names without faces. Histories without context. A civilization reduced to remnants that were already beginning to decay. The observers understood immediately. This was not a war for territory. This was extinction in its final stage. A senior counselor stepped forward just enough to be heard, but not enough to cross the chamber's threshold. You still have options, he said carefully. Relocation, cultural integration, preservation through coalition. They are not killing us, the Ilyari leader interrupted. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. They are removing us. Silence followed, not confusion, just instruction. The council did not respond immediately, because no one had authorized access. And yet, access had already been taken. Across the chamber, several representatives began issuing emergency countermeasures. Disconnect protocols, isolation commands, even physical shutdown orders. None of them worked. Their systems obeyed, technically, but the connection remained, not resisting, not fighting, simply existing beyond their control. The Ilyari leader was the first to move. Give it to them, she said. Her voice was steady now, resolved. Behind her, the archive cradle pulsed again, this time brighter, faster, as if responding to proximity. The biological matrix holding her people's remaining memories began to interface with the chamber's core systems, streams of fragmented consciousness translating into structured data. At first, the transfer was chaotic, broken identities, partial histories, sensory imprints without context, entire lifetimes reduced to disjointed impressions, laughter without faces, cities without names, grief without origin. Then something changed. The stream stabilized, not gradually, instantly, as if an external intelligence had understood the pattern and corrected it. The data reorganized itself in real time. Fragments aligned, corrupted sequences rebuilt, missing links extrapolated with terrifying precision. Within seconds, what had taken the Ilyari centuries to record was being reconstructed faster than anyone could process. One of the council technicians stared at his console, his voice barely audible. It's not copying. A pause. It's restoring. That word spread through the chamber with quiet horror, because restoration implied something impossible. Understanding. The transfer accelerated. Entire memory clusters flowed into the system. Languages, genealogies, artistic traditions, historical records. Not just preserved, but expanded. Patterns the Ilyari themselves had lost were being reconnected. Cultural gaps filled. Incomplete histories made whole. And still no fleet, no visible presence. Just a silent, overwhelming implication that something had already arrived. Stop the feed, one of the counselors ordered suddenly. We don't know what they're doing with it. They already know, another replied. No one could say how they knew that, but it felt true. At the center of the chamber, the Ilyari leader didn't look at the data. She looked at the display, at the single line that hadn't changed. Assessing. What are they waiting for? Someone asked. No one answered, because the question carried something deeper than curiosity. It carried fear. Then, without warning, the system updated. A second line appeared beneath the first. Classification. Civilizational predation. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Not physically, perceptually, a shift that no sensor could measure, but every living being present felt instinctively. The counselors exchanged looks, some confused, some alarmed. One of the older representatives, an Oleran historian, closed her eyes slowly. "Do you know what that means?" she whispered. No one responded, because they did. Predation was not a political term. It wasn't used in diplomacy. It wasn't used in war. It was a biological classification, and anything labeled as such was not negotiated with. The system updated again. Authority escalated. Across the chamber, several individuals physically stepped back this time, not out of protocol, out of instinct. "What have you done?" a Voran delegate murmured, staring at the Ilyari leader. She didn't answer, because the truth was already visible. This was no longer a request for help. It was a transfer of jurisdiction. Another message arrived. This time it was different, not distributed, directed, only one recipient. The Ilyari leader's interface lit up. She hesitated before opening it, not out of fear, but because somewhere deep beneath everything she had already lost, she understood that whatever came next would define what remained. She accepted the message. For a moment, her expression didn't change. Then subtly it did. Not relief, not hope, recognition. "What did they say?" the counselor asked. She looked up slowly. They asked a question. A pause. They didn't ask how many of us are left. Silence tightened across the chamber. They asked, her voice faltered for the first time, how much of us can still be recovered? No one spoke after that, because the implication was clear. Humanity wasn't preparing to defend the Ilyari. They were determining what could still be saved. And somewhere far beyond the archive world, something had already begun moving, not loudly, not visibly, but with the quiet certainty of a predator that had just identified its target. Humanity did not announce its arrival. It announced its presence. Quietly, everywhere. The first confirmation did not come from the archive world. It came from inside Dominion space. A prison transport, carrying over 2,000 reclassified labor assets, arrived at its destination exactly on schedule. Automated docking systems engaged. Security protocols cycled. No alarms were triggered. Everything appeared normal until the doors opened. The transport was empty. No bodies. No escape damage. No distress signal. Just 2,000 vacant restraints and a single message burned into the interior wall in perfect Dominion script. You misplaced something. Within the next hour, 4 more anomalies were reported. A data vault responsible for identity reassignment lost synchronization with Central Command, then came back online with 11.2 million entries restored to their original states. Entire populations that had been corrected suddenly remembered names, families, histories they were never supposed to recover. On a mining world, an overseer issued a routine command and was met with silence, not rebellion, not resistance, confusion. The workers no longer understood the language they had been forced to adopt because it had been replaced, restored. Something was rewriting reality faster than the Dominion could control it. Back on the archive world, the council chamber had not emptied. No one wanted to leave. Not anymore. Because now, for the first time, they were seeing it happen. Live. Streams of incoming data flooded into the observation systems. Intercepts, anomalies, fragments of intelligence no one had authorized, yet everyone could access. No encryption barriers remained, because there was no longer a need for them. Whoever controlled the flow of information controlled everything. They're inside the Dominion network. One analyst said, his voice thin with disbelief. No, the Oleran historian replied quietly. They've been inside. That distinction mattered, and it terrified everyone who understood it. The Ilyari archive continued to stabilize. What had once been a dying collection of fragmented consciousness was now something else entirely. Ordered, structured, expanding, growing, not just preserved, reconstructed. Patterns emerged that had never been visible before. Entire branches of cultural history reconnected. Lost linguistic roots reappeared. Even emotional imprints, grief, joy, identity, were being recontextualized into something coherent. It was no longer a backup. It was becoming whole. How is this possible? A council technician whispered. No one answered, because no known system could do this. Not at this scale. Not with this accuracy. Then the first direct contact came. Not a fleet. A ship. It entered the system without announcement, without detectable approach vector, and without triggering a single defensive response. One moment, the space around the archive world was empty. The next, it wasn't. The vessel was small by military standards. Sleek, dark, built with a kind of efficiency that made decorative design seem like a waste of mass. It emitted no visible energy signature, no broadcast signal, no identification code. And yet, every sensor on the station locked onto it instantly, as if it had allowed itself to be seen. Docking clearance was neither requested nor granted. The ship docked anyway. The chamber doors opened before anyone gave the command. This time, no one stayed back, because now they needed to see. The figure that entered did not look like a conqueror. No armor, no visible weapons, no entourage, just a single human. He walked into the chamber with measured steps, not hurried, not hesitant. His presence didn't dominate the room. It displaced it. Conversation stopped without instruction. Movement slowed. Even the ambient noise of systems seemed to recede, as if the environment itself was adjusting. He didn't look at the council. He didn't acknowledge the observers. He went straight to the Ilyari leader. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said calmly, "You're losing integrity at 0.7% per hour." The statement landed like a physical impact, not because of what it meant, but because of how easily he said it. He wasn't asking. He already knew. "We've stabilized what we can," the Ilyari leader replied carefully. "The rest can be recovered," he interrupted. Not hopeful, not speculative. Certain. A counselor stepped forward, unable to hold back any longer. "You've accessed restricted systems across multiple jurisdictions," he said sharply. "You've interfered with sovereign networks. You're operating without authorization. 43 hours. The number hit the chamber like a countdown everyone could suddenly hear. 43 hours until Ilyari ceased to exist, not as bodies, as a people. "What are you going to do?" someone asked. The question slipped out, unplanned, unfiltered. It didn't matter who said it, because everyone was asking it. The human didn't look at them. He was already turning away. "Continue restoration," he said to the Ilyari leader. "Prioritize identity anchors." "And the Dominion?" she asked. He paused at the threshold, just long enough to answer. "We've already begun." Then he left. No further explanation. No strategy briefing. No reassurance. Just a statement. And as the chamber doors closed behind him, the systems updated again, across every screen, every interface, every connected network. A new designation replaced the old. Status, intervention active, and beneath it, objective, recovery before erasure. The countdown had started, and somewhere in the dark between systems, humanity was already hunting. The Dominion did not panic. That was the first problem. For 3 hours after the first wave of anomalies, there was no official response, no fleet mobilization, no emergency declarations, no visible shift in command behavior. To outside observers, it looked like nothing had changed, which meant everything had, because the Dominion did not ignore threats. It absorbed them. The response began as a correction. Across Dominion-controlled systems, communication channels synchronized simultaneously. Civilian networks, trade routes, public broadcasts, all align under a single message. Localized data corruption detected. Stability protocols engaged. No mention of intrusions. No acknowledgement of interference. Just calm reassurance. And it worked, at least on the surface. Because while the galaxy saw stability, something deeper was breaking. Inside the archive, a human turned his head slightly, not fully, just enough. The counselor stopped speaking, not because he was interrupted, because something in that glance made continuing feel incorrect. "We are operating under Clause 0, the human said. His voice was level, controlled, final. Authorization is not required. Silence pressing again. He returned his attention to the Ilyari leader. Confirmed scope of loss, he said. She hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because saying out loud made it real. 17 worlds functionally erased, she said. 6 more in active process. Cultural continuity below survivable threshold in all occupied systems. The human nodded once, as if checking a calculation. Dominion response latency increasing, he said. They're adapting. A pause. They will escalate. To what? She asked. He met her eyes. For the first time, there was something there, not emotion, not anger, something colder. Final deletion protocol. The words didn't echo. They settled. Heavy, irreversible. How long? She asked. He didn't answer immediately, because he didn't need to calculate. He already had. World. The Council was no longer debating whether humanity had overstepped. They were trying to understand how far the overstep went. They've mapped everything, one intelligence director said, voice strained. Trade flows, identity registries, population distributions, they're not just targeting the Dominion. They're tracing dependency networks. Dependency networks? Another asked. Who relies on Dominion infrastructure? Who profits from it? Who stays silent because it's convenient? That realization landed harder than any military report, because it meant the scope had expanded. The conflict was no longer contained. It was spreading. The Ilyari leader stood at the center of the chamber again, but this time she wasn't watching the archive. She was watching the galaxy. Live feeds streamed across the chamber walls. Worlds she had never seen. Systems she had never known, all connected by invisible threads that were now being illuminated one by one. Trade hubs flickered as hidden agreements surfaced. Diplomatic channels collapsed under exposed contradictions. Entire coalitions began issuing conflicting statements within minutes of each other. Truth was spreading, uncontrolled, and it was destabilizing everything. Then the Dominion escalated, not loudly, not publicly, but unmistakably. A classified transmission, flagged at the highest security level, was intercepted and rerouted directly into the archive world systems. No one knew how. No one questioned it, because by now they understood. If something needed to be seen, humanity would make sure it was. The transmission activated. A Dominion official appeared, composed, authoritative, unshaken. To all recognized systems, he began, his tone measured. Recent disturbances have been attributed to unauthorized external interference. These actions threaten not only Dominion stability, but the equilibrium of interstellar civilization as a whole. A pause. We have exercised restraint. Another pause. But that restraint has limits. The image shifted, not to fleets, not to weapons, to something worse. A structure, massive, hidden, embedded deep within Dominion territory. At first glance, it looked like an archive, but it wasn't storing data. It was consuming it. Streams of information flowed into the core, identity matrices, cultural records, entire memory structures compressed and fed into a central processing mass that pulsed with unnatural rhythm. A voice, colder now, continued. This is a continuity engine. Silence gripped the chamber, because everyone understood what they were looking at. Not destruction. Transformation. We do not erase civilizations, the official said. We refine them, remove instability, preserve function, optimize existence. The image zoomed in, closer, deeper, and for a fraction of a second, something inside the engine moved. Not data, not structure, something alive, something aware. The feed cut abruptly. No one spoke, because no one knew what to say. The Ilyari leader's voice broke the silence. That's where they're putting us. Not a question, a realization. They're converting memory into control systems. The Alleran historian whispered, using identity as infrastructure. The implication was staggering. The Dominion wasn't just erasing civilizations. They were harvesting them, turning culture into code, turning existence into a resource. They'll activate it, someone said. When another asked, no one answered, because they didn't need to. Everyone turned, instinctively, to the display, to the countdown. 38 hours, 12 minutes, and 47 seconds. The chamber doors open again. This time, the human didn't wait. He entered with the same measured pace, but something had changed, not in his posture, not in his expression. In the room, the air felt tighter, sharper, like something invisible had drawn closer. "They've revealed the engine," the Ilyari leader said immediately. "We know," he replied. 2 words. No surprise. No urgency. Just confirmation. "You knew about this?" a counselor demanded. "We suspected," the human said. "And now—" A pause. "Now we confirm classification." He stepped toward the central display. The image of the continuity engine reappeared, this time overlaid with layers of data no one else could see. Structural weaknesses, energy flows, hidden access points, and something else. A pattern. Recursive architecture, he said quietly. "It's learning from every civilization it processes." The room went still. "Meaning?" the historian asked. He looked at her. "It's getting better at erasing you." Silence collapsed into something heavier. Fear, but deeper, because this wasn't just a threat. It was evolution. "What are you going to do?" the counselor asked again, his voice tighter now. The human didn't answer immediately, because this time, the answer mattered. "They've initiated end-stage conversion," he said finally. "Full cascade in—" He glanced at the display. 36 hours, 9 minutes, and 13 seconds. 36 hours. A shift, subtle, but final. "We're out of containment." The words landed like a verdict. "What does that mean?" the Ilyari leader asked. He met her gaze. For the first time since he arrived, there was no distance in it. "No more restoration-first strategy," he said. A breath. "We escalate." The room reacted instantly. Some stepped back. Some spoke over each other. Some simply froze. Because they understood what that word meant. Not diplomacy. Not intervention. War. "But the engine," someone started. "Will be handled," he said. "How?" This time, he answered, "We're going inside it." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was something else. Something closer to disbelief. Because no one had ever entered a Dominion core system and returned. No one had even tried. "That's impossible," the counselor said. The human didn't look at him. He was already turning away. "It's already in progress." The display updated. Not slowly. Not gradually. Instantly. A new layer appeared over the Dominion map. Points of light. Hundreds of them. Inside Dominion territory. Moving. Not fleets. Not formations. Something smaller. Faster. Coordinated with surgical precision. "What are those?" someone whispered. No one answered. Because deep down, they already knew. The human paused at the doorway. Just long enough to leave them with one final piece of truth. "They're not defending anymore," he said. "They're hunting the system itself." The doors closed. The countdown continued. And across the galaxy, for the first time in its history, the Dominion wasn't expanding. It was being dismantled from the inside out. The first human casualty report did not reach the Council. It wasn't transmitted. It wasn't announced. It was inferred. 6 minutes after the escalation order, one of the Dominion's outer relay systems collapsed completely and irreversibly. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Gone. Every trace of an internal structure erased with precision that mirrored the Dominion's own methods. For a moment, analysts believed it was retaliation, a demonstration. Then the reconstruction feeds updated, and the truth emerged. The relay hadn't been erased. It had been removed, extracted from the network entirely, along with every fragment of identity data it contained. Preserved, protected, but isolated. "They're cutting pieces out of the system," an intelligence officer whispered, "like removing infected tissue." No one responded, because the analogy was too accurate. Across Dominion space, the pattern repeated. Nodes vanished. Archives were stripped. Control hubs lost connection, not to destruction, but to absence. And wherever something was removed, something else followed. A presence, invisible, untraceable, relentless. Back on the archive world, the Ilyari restoration matrix surged. Data influx increased beyond projected limits. Entire cultural branches once thought permanently lost were suddenly reappearing. Intact, verified, alive. Songs no one remembered writing. Names that had been erased from every known record. Memories of worlds that technically no longer existed. The impossible was happening. Not just recovery. Reversal. How? The council demanded. No one had an answer until the human returned. He didn't wait for permission this time. He stepped directly into the center of the chamber, eyes already scanning the restoration feeds. "You're pulling from the engine," the Ilyari leader said immediately. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, without concealment. "You can access it?" A pause. "Not directly." That distinction mattered. And it was worse. "What does that mean?" the Alleran historian asked. The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he brought up a projection, not of the engine, of something older, something buried. A structure appeared, fragmented, incomplete, partially reconstructed from scattered data. It didn't resemble Dominion architecture. It didn't resemble anything current. It looked primitive, ancient, wrong. "This is where the engine came from," the human said. The chamber went still, because that wasn't possible. The Dominion had developed their systems over centuries, documented, verified, controlled. "No," the historian whispered. "That design, it doesn't match any known civilization." "It wouldn't," the human replied. "A beat. It predates them." Silence felt like a collapse. The projection shifted, expanded. More fragments filled in, more patterns aligned, until the shape became clearer. Not a machine. A network. A system designed to do one thing: systematically remove identity. "It's older than the Dominion," the human continued. "Older than most of the civilizations in this room." A pause. "And it's been used before." The implication hit like impact. Not new, not invented, inherited. The Ilyari leader took a step forward. "You're saying this isn't just happening to us?" The human met her gaze. "It already has." The room tightened, because suddenly the chamber itself made sense. Clause 0, the absence of records, the thing no one remembered. "You've seen this before," the historian said. Not a question, a realization. The human didn't deny it, but he didn't confirm it either. Not directly. "We encountered remnants," he said. "Fragments of civilization that shouldn't have disappeared but did." A pause. No war records. No survivors. No cultural traces. Only debris. And silence. "We didn't understand it then," he continued. "We do now." The projection updated again, overlaying the ancient structure with the Dominion's engine. The match was undeniable. Not identical, but evolved, refined, improved. "They didn't create this," the counselor said slowly. "They found it and adapted it," the human confirmed, "expanded it, integrated it into their infrastructure, a beat, and made it better." The weight of that settled heavily, because it meant the Dominion wasn't just an empire. It was a continuation, a recurrence. "That's why you classified it as predation," the historian whispered. "Yes." "And now?" the Ilyari leader asked. The human didn't answer immediately, because this time, the answer changed everything. He brought up the classification system, the one no one else had access to. Until now, it updated in real time. The old designation faded, replaced by something new, something worse. Classification. Recurring predatory architecture. The room didn't react at first, because they didn't understand what that meant. Then the human explained. "It's not just an empire," he said. "It's a system that learns, evolves, and reappears." A pause. "If left intact, it will happen again." Silence. Heavy. Absolute. "What does that mean for the Dominion?" someone asked. The question felt smaller than it should have, because the answer wasn't. The human looked at the projection, at the engine, at the thing behind it. "It means this isn't a war. A beat. It's containment." The word didn't echo. It settled, cold, final, back on the display. The countdown continued. 32 hours, 41 minutes, and 8 seconds. And then something changed. An alert. Not from the archive world, not from the council, from inside the engine itself. A signal, broadcast outward, unfiltered. The Dominion had responded. The projection shifted. The engine came into view again. But this time, it was different, active, fully. The internal structures moved faster now. Processing rates spiked. Energy output surged. They've accelerated the conversion, the Ilyari leader said. Yes. How long now? The human checked the display. Not the one in the chamber. The one only he could see. 29 hours. The number hit harder this time, because it was dropping faster than expected. They're adapting to you, the historian said. Yes. And if they finish? The question didn't need context. The human answered anyway. Then recovery becomes impossible. Silence. Again. But this time, it wasn't just fear. It was understanding. This wasn't about saving what remained. It was about whether anything would remain at all. The Ilyari leader stepped closer, her voice quieter now, but stronger. What happened if you fail? For the first time, the human didn't answer immediately, because there was no calculation to check, no data to confirm, only truth. They won't stop with you, he said. A pause. They'll get better. The chamber felt smaller, tighter, because now everyone in it understood. This wasn't just the Ilyari's war anymore. It never had been. And somewhere deep inside Dominion space, the engine was no longer just processing. It was watching, learning, preparing. And for the first time since humanity entered the conflict, something out there had begun to recognize the threat coming for it. The war changed shape. Not louder, not larger, sharper. There were still no grand fleet battles. No formations clashing in open space. No heroic charges or last stands broadcast across the stars. Instead, systems began to go quiet. Entire sectors of Dominion space dropped off the grid, not destroyed, not conquered, but disconnected. Trade lanes collapsed without warning. Relay stations failed mid-transmission. Command chains fractured as orders stopped arriving, or arrived rewritten. To outside observers, it looked like decay. To those inside it, it felt like suffocation. They're isolating us, a Dominion strategist reported from a secure command node, segmenting infrastructure, breaking continuity. How? His superior demanded. No answer came, because the systems weren't being attacked. They were being understood. Back on the archive world, the scope became visible. The human had left no instructions behind, but the results were undeniable. Across the Dominion network, invisible vectors move with impossible coordination. Small, fast, and precise. They didn't engage fleets. They didn't strike cities. They targeted connections. Every route that carried identity data, disrupted. Every node that processed cultural conversion, severed. Every archive pipeline feeding the engine, interrupted or rerouted. Not destruction. Control. They're starving it, the Alleran historian said. No one argued, because the pattern was clear. The engine wasn't just a weapon. It was a system that required constant input, memories, identities, histories, fed into it to sustain its processing. Humanity wasn't attacking it directly. They were cutting off its food, but the engine adapted. Inside Dominion territory, the response escalated, not with fleets, with speed. Conversion rates surged. Populations were processed faster, more aggressively. Entire regions were pushed into accelerated assimilation. Identities stripped and converted before disruption could reach them. The system compensated, evolved. They're compressing timelines, the human said when he returned to chamber. Again, no one had seen him enter. He was simply there, watching the data. They've identified the pattern, he continued. They're prioritizing throughput over stability. The Ilyari leader stepped closer. What does that mean? A pause. It means they're willing to lose precision to maintain output. The words carried weight, because loss of precision meant something critical. They'll make mistakes, the historian said. Yes, and those mistakes will be permanent. Silence, because that changed everything. Until now, there had been hope that what was taken could be restored, recovered, rebuilt. But if the engine rushed, If it processed faster than it could maintain integrity, then what it consumed would be corrupted, not erased, not stored, destroyed, irretrievable. The countdown updated. 2,400 hours, 13 and 55 seconds. Time wasn't just running out. It was accelerating. We need to reach it, the Ilyari leader said. Directly. Stop it at the source. The human didn't respond immediately because that option had already been considered and rejected. Direct assault risks total data loss, he said. If the core destabilizes during extraction, everything inside it is gone. Then what's the alternative? A counselor demanded. This time, the human answered without hesitation. We take control. The room stilled. Of the engine? Someone asked. Yes. That's not possible. The human didn't argue, didn't explain. He just brought up the projection. The engine again. But this time, something new appeared. Movement, not within the structure. Around it, inside its systems. Points of light. Hundreds. No, thousands. They're already inside, the historian whispered. The human nodded once. Infiltration units, he said, embedded across all layers. How? The counselor asked, voice cracking slightly. That system rewrites identity, erases recognition. You can't just... We didn't enter as ourselves, the human interrupted. A pause. We enter it as what it understands. The implication spread slowly. Then, all at once, you let it process you, the Ilyari leader said. Not accusation, not disbelief, understanding. Yes, the word landed harder than anything else he had said. You allowed your own people to be converted? A beat, temporarily, he said. The chamber erupted, voices overlapping. Protests, shock, outright refusal to accept what they were hearing. That's not infiltration, that's sacrifice, someone shouted. You don't know if they'll come back. You're feeding the system you're trying to destroy. The human didn't raise his voice, didn't defend the decision. He simply waited until the noise burned itself out. Then, we are not feeding it, he said quietly. A pause. We are mapping it. The room went still again. Every layer it processes, he continued. Every pathway it uses to break identity down. We track it, learn it, reconstruct it from the inside. A beat. And when we understand it completely, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because now they understood this wasn't just war. It was dissection. The countdown ticked lower. 21 hours, 52 minutes, and 8 seconds. And the ones inside, the Ilyari leader asked softly, the ones you sent in. For the first time, the human hesitated. Not long, just enough to matter. We will recover them, he said. Not certainty, not promise, intention. Outside the chamber, the galaxy shifted. Dominion systems continued to fall silent. But now, something else was happening. Messages began appearing. Not broadcasts, not signals. Warnings, written in Dominion script, left in command centers, data cores, abandoned relay stations. Simple, direct, unmistakable. Stop the process. This is your final window. No signature, no identification. But everyone knew the Dominion had been given a choice. And for the first time in its history, it hesitated. Inside the engine, the system slowed. Not stopped, not yet, but something had changed. Because now, it wasn't just processing data. It was being observed, understood, and prepared for something far worse than destruction. The countdown dropped again. 20 hours. And somewhere deep within the engine, something ancient stirred, not reacting, recognizing. Because for the first time in a very long time, something had entered its system that it could not fully comprehend. The war changed shape. Not louder, not larger, sharper. There were still no grand fleet battles. No formations clashing in open space. No heroic charges or last stands broadcast across the stars. Instead, systems began to go quiet. Entire sectors of Dominion space dropped off the grid, not destroyed, not conquered, but disconnected. Trade lanes collapsed without warning. Relay stations failed mid-transmission. Command chains fractured as orders stopped arriving, or arrived rewritten. To outside observers, it looked like decay. To those inside it, it felt like suffocation. They're isolating us, a Dominion strategist reported from a secure command node. Segmenting infrastructure, breaking continuity. How? His superior demanded. No answer came, because the systems weren't being attacked. They were being understood. Back on the archive world, the scope became visible. The human had left no instructions behind, but the results were undeniable. Across the Dominion network, invisible vectors move with impossible coordination. Small, fast, and precise. They didn't engage fleets. They didn't strike cities. They targeted connections. Every route that carried identity data, disrupted. Every node that processed cultural conversion, severed. Every archive pipeline feeding the engine, interrupted or rerouted. Not destruction. Control. They're starving it. The Ilyari historian said. No one argued, because the pattern was clear. The engine wasn't just a weapon. It was a system that required constant input, memories, identities, histories, fed into it to sustain its processing. Humanity wasn't attacking it directly. They were cutting off its food. But the engine adapted. Inside Dominion territory, the response escalated, not with fleets, with speed. Conversion rates surged. Populations were processed faster, more aggressively. Entire regions were pushed into accelerated assimilation. Identities stripped and converted before disruption could reach them. The system compensated, evolved. They're compressing timelines, the human said when he returned to chamber. Again, no one had seen him enter. He was simply there, watching the data. They've identified the pattern, he continued. They're prioritizing throughput over stability. The Ilyari leader stepped closer. What does that mean? A pause. It means they're willing to lose precision to maintain output. The words carried weight, because loss of precision meant something critical. They'll make mistakes, the historian said. Yes, and those mistakes will be permanent. Silence, because that changed everything. Until now, there had been hope that what was taken could be restored, recovered, rebuilt. But if the engine rushed, if it processed faster than it could maintain integrity, then what it consumed would be corrupted, not erased, not stored, destroyed, irretrievable. The countdown updated. 2,400 hours, 13 and 55 seconds. Time wasn't just running out. It was accelerating. We need to reach it, the Ilyari leader said. Directly, stop it at the source. The human didn't respond immediately, because that option had already been considered and rejected. Direct assault risks total data loss, he said. If the core destabilizes during extraction, everything inside it is gone. Then what's the alternative? A counselor demanded. This time, the human answered without hesitation. We take control. The room stilled. Of the engine? Someone asked. Yes. That's not possible. The human didn't argue, didn't explain. He just brought up the projection. The engine again. But this time, something new appeared. Movement, not within the structure. Around it, inside its systems. Points of light. Hundreds. No, thousands. They're already inside, the historian whispered. The human nodded once. Infiltration units, he said, embedded across all layers. How? The counselor asked, voice cracking slightly. That system rewrites identity, erases recognition. You can't just... We didn't enter as ourselves, the human interrupted. A pause. We entered as what understands. The implication spread slowly. Then all at once, you let it process you, the Ilyari leader said. Not accusation, not disbelief, understanding. Yes, the word landed harder than anything else he had said. You allowed your own people to be converted? A beat. Temporarily, he said. The chamber erupted, voices overlapping. Protests, shock, outright refusal to accept what they were hearing. That's not infiltration. That's sacrifice, someone shouted. You don't know if they'll come back. You're feeding the system you're trying to destroy. The human didn't raise his voice, didn't defend the decision. He simply waited until the noise burned itself out. Then, "We are not feeding it," he said quietly. A pause. "We are mapping it." The room went still again. "Every layer it processes," he continued. "Every pathway it uses to break identity down. We track it, learn it, reconstruct it from the inside. A beat. And when we understand it completely," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because now they understood this wasn't just war. It was dissection. The countdown ticked lower. 21 hours, 52 minutes, and 8 seconds. "And the ones inside," the Ilyari leader asked softly, "the ones you sent in." For the first time, the human hesitated. "Not long, just enough to matter. We will recover them," he said. Not certainty, not promise, intention. Outside the chamber, the galaxy shifted. Dominion systems continued to fall silent. But now, something else was happening. Messages began appearing. Not broadcasts, not signals, warnings, written in Dominion script, left in command centers, data cores, abandoned relay stations. Simple, direct, unmistakable. Stop the process. This is your final window. No signature, no identification. But everyone knew the Dominion had been given a choice. And for the first time in its history, it hesitated. Inside the engine, the system slowed. Not stopped. Not yet. But something had changed. Because now, it wasn't just processing data. It was being observed, understood, and prepared for something far worse than destruction. The countdown dropped again. 20 hours. And somewhere deep within the engine, something ancient stirred. Not reacting, recognizing. Because for the first time in a very long time, something had entered its system that it could not fully comprehend. The last hour did not feel like a battle. It felt like subtraction. The engine no longer accelerated. It no longer adapted. It did something far more dangerous. It focused. Across its entire structure, all non-essential processes collapsed inward. Peripheral conversions halted. Expansion routines terminated. External networks severed. Everything redirected to one objective: completion. Inside the core, the system condensed, layer upon layer of stolen identity, folding into a single, compressed state. Not chaos. Order. Perfect, irreversible order. They're consolidating. The Alleran historian said, her voice tight. If it finishes this phase, nothing left inside will be separable. The Ilyari leader didn't look at the projection. She was watching the restoration feeds. The ones that were still active, still flowing, still alive. "How much?" she asked. The human didn't answer immediately, because the number mattered, and it wasn't enough. 72% recoverable, he said. A pause. Projected loss, 28. The room didn't react. Not out loud, because they understood what that meant. 28% of an entire civilization. Gone. Not killed. Not erased. Lost. The Ilyari leader closed her eyes briefly, not in despair, in acceptance. "Then we save the 72, she said. The human looked at her, and for the first time since the beginning, there was no calculation in his expression, just alignment. Inside the engine, everything converged. Human infiltration units reached the core, not as individuals anymore, not as identities, as structure. They had mapped it, every pathway, every loop, every decision node. Now, they executed. Extraction phase, the human said quietly. The system reacted instantly, not violently, not chaotically, with precision. Data streams reverse direction, not outward, upward. Identity clusters, millions of them, were pulled free from a compression field, redirected through pathways the engine itself had used to consume them, now used to release them. They're using its own architecture against it. The historian whispered, "Yes, but it's resisting." It was. The presence surged again, not confused anymore, not uncertain, aware. "You cannot separate what has been made whole." "We don't need to," the human replied. A pause. "We only need to break your hold." The pressure inside the engine intensified. Energy spikes. Structural strain. Instability creeping across systems designed to never fail. The countdown dropped. 18 minutes and 47 seconds. Time was collapsing. You're destabilizing it, the Ilyari leader said. Yes. That risks everything inside. Yes. The word didn't change, because now there was no safe path left, only the necessary one. Inside the core, human units initiated the final sequence. Not control, not domination, disruption. They didn't overwrite the system. They didn't shut it down. They introduced something it could not process. Inconsistency, fragments of identity not aligned to any pattern, memories that contradicted each other, emotional imprints that could not be reduced to function. Choice. The engine reacted immediately. Error. Variance detected. It attempted correction. Normalization. Compression. But the variance spread. Not randomly. Intentionally. It's breaking its own logic loops, the historian said. Yes. The presence surged again. Stronger now. More focused. You are corrupting the system. We're freeing it, the human said. A beat from you. The pressure peaked. Structural integrity warnings cascaded across the projection. Energy thresholds exceeded. Containment fields destabilizing. The countdown fell. 6 minutes and 12 seconds. Extraction nearing limit, the human said. How much? The Ilyari leader asked. 76%. More than expected, but still not all. Keep going. They did, until the system couldn't hold. The first fracture wasn't visible, not externally. It happened inside the logic core. A single contradiction, unresolvable. Then another. Then collapse, not explosion, not destruction. Failure. The engine lost cohesion. Its processes unraveled, not violently, but fundamentally. The architecture couldn't sustain itself without perfect alignment, and humanity had broken that alignment. The presence pulsed one final time. You create instability. The human didn't look away. Yes. A pause. And we survive it. Silence. Then nothing. The presence vanished. Not defeated. Not destroyed. Disconnected. The engine collapsed into inert structure. Still massive. Still present. But empty. The countdown hit 0. And nothing ended, because it had already stopped. Across the galaxy, Dominion systems went quiet. Not disconnected. Not destroyed. Released. Data flooded outward. Not controlled. Not filtered. Revealed. The truth of everything the Dominion had done. Every erased civilization, every altered identity, every hidden atrocity, spread across every network. No one could deny it. No one could suppress it. The empire didn't fall. It unraveled. From within, back in the chamber, the restoration matrix stabilized. Fully. No longer fragmenting. No longer fading. Alive. The Ilyari stood still. Watching. Feeling. Not what they had lost. What remained. A presence approached. The human. It's over, someone said. He didn't answer immediately. Because it wasn't. It's contained, he said. A pause. For now. The weight of that settled. Because they understood. This thing, whatever it was, had existed before. And now, it had been stopped again. Not ended. Never ended. The Ilyari leader stepped forward. You saved us. The human looked at her. Not as a savior. Not as a victor. As something else. No, he said. A pause. We made sure you still exist. The difference mattered. Around them, the galaxy began to shift. Not in fear. In understanding. And somewhere, far from the chamber, a restored Ilyari child sat in silence. A fragment of memory returning. A voice once lost. Now remembered. A song. Soft. Unbroken. Proof that something had survived. And that somewhere in the dark, there were still things willing to become monsters. So others didn't disappear.